It's one of the most controversial questions of the ages. Who is Jesus? Is he a good man? Is he a prophet? Or is he, as Christians believe, actually divine? Well, meet Mike Licona. He's founder of Risen Jesus, a Christian organization in Virginia Beach, Virginia, and co-author of The Case for the Resurrection of Jesus. And here's Shabir Ali. He's founder of the Islamic Information Center in Toronto, Canada, and author of the book, Is Jesus God? The Bible Says No. Now, Shabir, as a Muslim, how is it that you view Jesus? Who is he? You don't consider him to be divine.
I consider him to be the prophet and Messiah of God, born of the Virgin Mary. He performed many miraculous deeds. God raised him miraculously, and we expect his supernatural return.
But he is not the Son of God. He is not divine in any way.
And no.
Okay, Michael, now you're making the affirmative claim that Jesus is indeed divine. Now, that's an easy claim to make, but what evidence do you have that he believed that and that he proved it to be true?
Well, Lee, scholars have established that within just a few years of Jesus' crucifixion, the early Christians were regarding him as divine, despite the fact that he had been crucified. Now, what on earth would have led them to this type of a belief that was so strong that they were willing to die for it? We have historical evidence that Jesus claimed divinity and rose from the dead. When someone claims to be divine and rises from the dead, we should believe him.
Shabir, how do you respond to that?
Well, I feel that Mike is putting words into the lips of Jesus, saying that Jesus must have claimed that because the disciples believed it. To address the first point, there is nothing recorded in the Gospel showing that Jesus clearly affirmed his own divinity. And second, there is evidence in the Acts of the Apostles and elsewhere in the New Testament that the original followers of Jesus did not actually take him to be God.
Okay, Michael, those are important assertions there. Did Jesus believe he was God, and how do we know?
It would seem that he hadn't read the New Testament if he's going to make the statement that the New Testament nowhere has any place where Jesus claimed to be divine. It's filled with those kind of claims. But I think what he's probably referring to are statements that can be historically verified or for which we have good evidence.
For example?
Well, for example, you've got Mark chapter 14, verses 61 through 64, where Jesus is before the Jewish leaders and the high priest says, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of God?" And Jesus says, "Yes, and you will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven." That's something in the Old Testament that only God does. "And seated at the right hand of power." In other words, he's claiming to be a co-occupant of God's throne.
Shabir, has he convinced you?
No, I don't think so, because he's referring to the trial of Jesus before the Jewish Sanhedrin, and this is reported variously in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. In Matthew and Luke's versions, we have it that Jesus did not actually affirm the title. He said, "You are the ones claiming that I am," in essence. And to say that Jesus comes on the clouds of heaven proves that he is God himself. That would be to say that God could not do this for one of his creatures. So I do not think that arguing from silence will make Jesus God. It is clear that to affirm Jesus as God involves a logical self-contradiction. It involves contradiction with the divine scriptures, and it involves also a religious problem. Now, I want to return you to that passage from the trial before the Jewish Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin asks him, "Are you the Messiah, Son of the living God?" Now, and it says that Jesus said, "I am," in Mark's Gospel, but in Matthew and Luke's account of the same episode, Jesus says, "You say that I am." And unless you can first establish the actual words of Jesus, you cannot build a reasonable commentary on that. Now, it's better to
Shabir,
say
what does he say right after that, "You say that I am"? He says, "You will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven and seated at the right hand of power." I mean,
so
these
you
are
have to decide. Are you saying that his divinity is based on his saying, "I am," or his saying that he's coming on the clouds of heaven? First of all, there is nothing
clouds
clear.
Of heaven, seated at the right hand of power.
Well, here I'm saying that God can do that for any of his creatures, and that would not make the creature himself God. If God calls up a creature with him to his throne,
Jesus is claiming to be a co-occupant of God's throne.